Welcome back. Which one were we up to?
This one.
That one? Okay. So our next question for you is, what does connecting to country mean to you?
So for me, I think it starts off with respecting protocol from my lens. So obviously, like when I'm talking about respecting country from a non-Indigenous person lens, I obviously don't think they should be because they don't know, that cultural stuff. But for me, it's about respecting protocol and that sort of thing. And respecting ancestors. And I thought this might be a good conversation because I think this is one that doesn't get talked about a lot. Is this concept of like shame. So shame is like a big thing in Indigenous culture. And I know that in Western culture we have kind of the opposite where we don't, shame is like not a good, like we know shame's not a good thing. And it's very interesting to walk in both worlds of that as someone who is Indigenous but also brought up in this Western world. But I still think there's something important about shame. I think we can learn from the Western world that there's times when you shouldn't shame people. And I think that's for things that they can't help, things that they are, who they are. Like, things that are inherent. But behavior that doesn't support the community, and that's where our shame comes from, is I always think of this thing that my grandfather used to say to my mum. So that's where my indigeneity comes through. And he used to always go, "Don't you shame me. Don't you shame me with that behavior." When you were doing something that didn't help, that was not constructive to the unit. And that's because we're collectivist, and I think there's some balance to be found between, not shaming people and, for things that are, who they are, things they can't change, all these sorts of things that I think Western culture did traditionally change, and now they're like, let's switch that on its head. And then these other things that are like, I hate this conversation of no shame because I'm like, there's people that should be shamed. I think about half the people in my comments. I'm like, you should be shamed. I'm like, I'm sorry. Like, it's just a fact. But for me, it's this connecting to country is not shaming my ancestors and not shaming country. So that was the tie-in. It was a story, but we got there. But that's a big thing for me, is not bringing shame to the group. And again, that's not on things that are me, because I don't think people, have like are born with like inherent shame. Like, again, Christianity makes you think that born with sin type thing. Again, you as a person don't have that. It's behaviors. So other things connecting to country are sustainability. And I think it's important to go with that because people hear that and they're like, suddenly think that I'm like, don't have a loo that flushes and stuff. And I'm like, we as an individual are not the sole responsibility of like all this pollution that happens, but we can do little acts of sustainability as people. And that's what I mean. Unfortunately we can't fix everything. I think a lot of us would love to, but little acts of sustainability is what, again, when we talk about like country has a spirit and is alive to us. So it knows that there is not much that we can do on an individual level, but it knows the difference between you're trying and you're not doing anything. Yeah. And for me, giving back to community as well as to country. So again, it's, I think this is a big thing that we have, this whole giving back to community, especially for people like me that are what we would call reconnectors. I think there's something very important about giving back to community when you've been able to walk through the world with a privilege, with a privilege that I still have. I obviously don't get visually like targeted in the same way as darker skinned mob. So I think those things are important by giving back in ways that just acknowledge that privilege. Yes, that privilege has come through colonization, which in itself is a lack of privilege, but again, it's very complex. And lastly, I think this is the most important one. is actually just spending time with country, and that's on that physical one. So that is spending time in nature and just taking that time. And I think that's something that resonates for so many spiritual people, because we have such a connection to the land, no matter what kind of practice it is that we do. But I think that one also for me is very much connected to my Irish stuff as well. There is something very inherently like being on the land with that one as well, which really is where all the witchcraft started in the first place when I was younger, was trying to connect to that kind of Celtic history. And there is something, of that being on the land with the trees and all that sort of stuff. So yes, that's what connecting to country means to me. It's a lot of things, but I guess at its core, it's giving country my time.
Yeah, I love that so much. It's very similar to how I fostered my own relationship with dark and young country. So obviously I'm not First Nations, but there's still that, because I use a lot of the natural resources that nature provides. And I've always been, at least with the Irish practice as well, like it's always building right relationship with the land and with the spirits, because they nourish you. Everything nourishes you in one aspect, and they give to you. If you take, it's again that not taking more than is required. So it can grow and nourish other things as well, and other people might come along and need it too. But it's that, building right relationships. So that's really big in my practice, as well as the spending time, but then also, I guess part of my duty, I felt like, because as well, I'm not First Nations, but utilizing the resources of the land, for me, giving back monetarily, or like doing nature cleanups and stuff. Like I've got one plot of land that I'll clean up the rubbish regularly from.
That's
so
amazing.
Doing stuff like that was really big to build right relationship with the country that I'm on, because it didn't feel right as a human or right spiritually to take without showing how much respect I do hold for what I'm utilizing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's
completely,
it's about that joint relationship, at the end of the day, really. Yeah, you can't take without giving.
Yeah, because we both dark and young countries, the main resource of my practice. Like, so it just didn't feel right to not acknowledge that and then give it back the respect that it gives me, I guess, in a way, by allowing me to perform my craft.
So, it kind of leads into the next question too. How important from a spiritual standing do you feel connection to country is?
I'd say, again, I can't talk for all mob, but I would argue that for a lot of us at least, a connection to country is the utmost, is, the number one element. Again, a lot of mob will call themselves spiritual, or that they just believe in the dreaming, all those things. They're not going to go as far as like I do in kind of going, I actually practice kind of these things, because I am doing more than just like I'm bringing in other elements, but they still have that spiritual element of going, that country is, again, part of that wider story of the dreaming. Country is developed through all those characters or spirits that are in the dreaming. So you kind of can't have one without the other. And again, that country is really at the heart of everything we do, because it does dictate, our dreaming stories. So all that kind of spiritual lens, our sacred lens, it dictates then the physical elements, or all the land aspects, as well as, then all our aspects of who we are, our totems, our moieties, which essentially is kind of our like political system, if I had to nutshell it. All those things, it is kind of the overarching like thing that goes, because you're in this country or this space, these are all the things that are relevant. So to ignore it, you would lose everything else. So essentially you've lost your culture. And that's why being removed from country is so painful in our history, because that is where all that loss started. Or the word loss is, I would say, touchy. I would say because we didn't lose it, we tried very hard to keep it. I guess it was stolen, I guess, or removed or destroyed or dismantled, are probably better words. But that's really why it's a very painful experience for so many. Because it is kind of like having a piece of you taken out, because it is what connects you to everything else in that unit, if that makes sense.
Yeah. It's a very heavy subject, I guess.
Yeah, I deep dived that real hard. We were on a high, and then I went, actually, the roller coaster's coming down.
It's really important, and it may make certain people feel uncomfortable, but it's something that needs to be spoken about, regardless. So
absolutely.
Keep going. Next. Okay. What are some ways a person could intentionally or unintentionally disrespect country from a spiritual standing?
I broke this up in my notes in two ways because I thought let's start with the unintentional. Because I think, for the most part, again, because we see country as kind of living and conscious, and I think for the most part, if it knows someone's not intentionally doing something to hurt it, it's flexible. But I think one of the ways that, when I've talked to a lot of people who are non-Indigenous that are open, to our stuff, they will always have this story of whether it's, I was on a hike, or I was here in some element where they're in nature, and they're like, I got to this point and something just felt like pushing me back, don't go here. And I just kind of ignored it. I just thought, I'm just in the back of my head, like it's my subconscious. I pushed it, I went over and I hurt myself, or something bad happened, or, all these things. Story is always the same. That's the unintentional. You didn't do it on purpose. You're not like, I'm going to go harm the land. It's just a human nature to be like, I'm just in my own head. But that is actually country going, there's a reason, we're telling you it's a safety reason that you're not supposed to be going past this point, whatever that reason might be.
Yeah.
There you go.
So I've got, where I live, there's this like fire trail, and I will walk there, and then I'll get to a certain point, and I swear the trees are just like shouting at me like, this place isn't right for you. And then I'm just like, okay, well, I'm just going to turn around because I ain't taking on the trees. So I'm just going to go right back where I came from. I ain't taking on nature.
See, it's always a walk, a hike, a something, and you're listening. So good thing. And it could be for so many reasons. I think spiritual people, because you are already in touch, you are listening. You're like, I got you, babe. I'm going. I'm getting the heck out of Dodge. And exactly.
Even the trees were formed like the Huggerlar's rune, which is like the ultimate chaos rune, and I'm just
and you're like, you're like, it's not for me. And it could be for so many reasons, again, because the ancestors and spirits can see time at all points. They might know something's bad is happening to you, and it's safety and they're stopping it. Or maybe, like for me, as a cis woman, they're going, this is men's business area. Like from a traditional ceremony point, they're like, get out of here. What are you doing? Or maybe it's a massacre site or something that has never been acknowledged, so it's just heavy. So that sort of thing. And they're like, the spirits are just restless, like, leave it alone. Could be so many things. But yes, it is so funny to have so many examples of this, like with friends, and like, even my tattoo artists have this, like, had stories like this, and they're like, yeah, I wasn't gonna fuck with that, because they're very spiritual people too, like, so they were like, see ya. But I think that's the unintentional way that happens a lot of the time, is just going onto land that you don't realize, because again, you can't help that. Like, just kind of walking. But the intentional ways of disrespecting country are probably, what we're thinking of immediately is, disrespecting it physically, like littering, again, not being sustainable where you can be. Again, we can't all achieve like peak sustainability for lots of different reasons, but if you can implement something, every now and then, again, country sees, country knows you're trying. And I think the other thing is in that presentation that I do at work where I talk about country and this concept, I have this kind of one bit where I have this sort of line where I say, because country and First Nations people have been in this reciprocal relationship for so long, when you hurt one, you hurt the other. So when you hurt country, you hurt mob. But when you heal country, do something good for country, you heal First Nations people. So if you disrespect mob, you are automatically intentionally disrespecting community. Oh my Lord, country. Getting all my words mixed up here now. So, and vice versa. Because it displaces country. It goes, well, my people that are connected with me, you've put that balance out. So now I'm out of balance because we're in this, kind of scale situation. And look, I think typically the people that are ready to disrespect First Nations people probably are fine to disrespect country, if I'm being frank. But that at the end, it's important to say both those things are important. Because in the spiritual community, we do have a lot of people that are very eco-conscious, but then they're super bad on the other, caring about systemic racism. So my thing is, well, if you are so eco-conscious and things, well, you care about country, then you need to care about the First Nations people on the other side of that. They are in tandem. You can't take the two of us out. We are a togetherness.
Yeah, 100%. It's very much something that I think as well, just from like an outsider's perspective, that needs to go hand in hand, like caring for the country as well as advocating for Indigenous rights and allyshipping in a way that's like right for all, not just like when I say right for all, I mean like one that's fostering a future where we can have right relationship in a, how am I wording this? Like togetherness?
Yes.
Like where everyone, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I'm totally, and that's it. Like, I think at the end of the day, I think, First Nations people, again, are typically, I think we're quite forgiving people, actually. And all we're asking for is what every human wants, is justice and reconciliation. And all that sort of stuff. We're not asking for anything more than that. And these sorts of things, like being respectful of country, is an act of reconciliation. Because you're showing that you respect something that's so entrenched with us. You're again essentially respecting us when you respect it. So,
Yeah.
I don't want to go too much on a tangent there. trying to hold that.
Go for it. Let it all out. I'm obsessed with it. So I know within my practice, like I've got the Morrigan, who is an ancestral deity of mine. So she's the goddess of many things, but including sovereignty of the Irish people. So sovereignty is huge within Irish practice because it was something that was fought for amongst other Irish like clans, but then also something that was unified and fought for against colonization. So how important is and would be sovereignty for country all involved?
So we obviously I'm not even going to say we. I mean from an actual legal perspective, sovereignty is not ceded. And I don't want to get into all the nitty-gritties of the law because it's really like complicated and like crazy. But in essence, like by their own laws, the English did not meet the requirements for settlement. So they're not settlers, they didn't settle, none of that. They also don't meet their own legal requirement for conquest. So the only thing they did was illegally invade, which means there's been no legal cessation of any country here. And the Mabo decision basically said that we all had native title and sovereignty, inherently at the time of colonization. So that's why we say sovereignty was never ceded, because it wasn't, and it hasn't, even by their own laws at the time. Not just us going, well, we believe we were sovereign. It's literally your own laws disproved that what you were doing. And it is very, if you're a history person, go look at it. It's very interesting. France and I don't know, Europe was like having a moment like they always do, infighting. So they weren't really paying attention to England. So England's like, I'm going to do what I want. So that's why they got away with it all, basically. Their international laws were like, it's wild. They were just like, oh, well, nobody's doing anything. Like, I can get away with it. But that's essentially the whole thing of sovereignty for us. It isn't just this thing of we're saying we are sovereign. It is we are. The Mabo decision said that, and your own bullshit said that, So it's this whole like, I don't know why it's still an argument type thing. Like when we say, oh, always was, always will be Aboriginal land, and they go, no, it wasn't. You were conquered. I'm like, no, we like literally weren't though, babe. Like, yes, we were invaded and colonized. Not disagreeing there. That did in fact happen. Colonization happened. But these legal terms that are important to say and use properly when we're talking about such a complex thing, like that didn't happen. It wasn't legal. So get out of my comment with that. Leave. Locked.
Oh, I love that. Okay, so I guess that kind of leads into the next question of like, what is some advice that you would give to people who aren't First Nations about how to best connect to country and build right relationship with her? So again, right relationship being the Irish term for like building respect alongside spirit and what's best for the land.
I think it's such a good term. And I will say I have not come across that term before, despite kind of all, my Irish stuff there. So you bet you're going to see it. You're going to hear it. You'll see it pop up in a video probably. And I'm like, yeah, I've totally known it forever. No, I'm kidding. But I think, again, because of that interconnectedness between First Nations people and country, you have to do work on both. So all that stuff that we kind of talked about, being sustainable physically on country and all that sort of stuff is great. But then there's also the work with First Nations people that has to be done to even out that relationship. And I think first and foremost is, and this is the hardest one for people, depending on the type of person they are, is recognizing power, privilege, and bias. And I think people hear me say that, especially online, and they suddenly think that I'm saying I exclude myself from that. I'm like, we are all, when I'm talking Western countries, so Australia, America, UK, all that sort of stuff, we're all born into a specific system that automatically prioritizes capitalism and the patriarchy. I'm like, I had to unlearn still have to unlearn a lot of misogynistic things, a lot of like ableist stuff. Like, do you know what I mean? I'm like, we're not exempt. Yeah. I don't suddenly, just because I'm like, I'm Indigenous, I get exempt from like everything ever, and I'm like just like the pinnacle of perfection. I'm like, I'm not. When I say this, I'm not saying this to you. I'm not saying you're the problem. I'm saying the system is the problem, and we all have to do this work, and I am not exempt from that. And it's a hard process because it requires a lot of self-reflection, and that is very scary for people because they have to go, wow, you were a dickhead in that situation. Like, that was nasty shit. Like, and that's hard to say, but like, makes you a better person at the end of the day. And sure, there will be people in your life that are like, I don't like them. And you'll be like, yeah, I get why you don't like me because I was an asshole back then. All those sorts of things. But
I guess it comes back to that shame aspect, hey?
Yeah, exactly. And again, everybody is, I would say, born not knowing. So you gotta, and then you're fed all this crap how else are you going to fix it if you don't unlearn it?
Yeah.
The best that you can hope for in life is to try to be better each day. You're not going to be perfect, but better is the goal. So kind of trying to undo that as much as you can. Again, chip away at it, and listening to mob, and it's all those things that are, if you're an ally, you're already probably doing it. And yes, still, of course, allies make mistakes. Sometimes they center themselves too much. We all have that experience on different things where, we might be an ally for something where we're not actually part of that community, and we've probably crossed that line a little bit just because we're so passionate, and then we go, actually, we need to amplify rather than put my own voice in, blah, 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 blah. But again, I think for the most part, people know when someone's trying to be genuine and someone's just trying to be like, look at me, show pony type thing. So I think you've got those two parts in terms of building that right relationship. So you've got the physical element of country, but then all that spiritual element comes with actually treating First Nations people respectfully, acknowledging history, acknowledging how that, how history actually lives on today. Again, history is not in a vacuum. We are all a culmination of everyone that's come before us in our lines, everyone that's come before us that's influenced those lines, and going, what can I do? How can I make today better for everyone? How can I make tomorrow better for everyone?
Yeah. I love that so much.
Mm-hmm.
It's I think it's something that, especially if you are starting at your spiritual journey within Australia and you're not Indigenous, it kind of, and you are like an ally, it can feel a bit daunting to like know when you're overtreading, I guess would be the best way to put it, overstepping or overtreading into something that could be unintentionally disrespectful. So yeah, like trying to build that right relationship with country. I think it's, it all comes back down to building up the country and the people from the country as well.
Yeah. I think Kacie said it really well as well, in terms of like, people who are passionate about it that, may come across where they're overstepping, that little bit, not meaning to, but it's just because they're driven by the passion, where it's all about giving the right people the voices for themselves to have that platform in order to bring that conversation to the table themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So,
which is exactly, again, what we're trying to do with the podcast.
Yeah.
Get people
absolutely.
with the right opinions and voices out there to help guide others where to step, I guess, would be the
and I think that's the blessing of social media. There's so many, bad things about social media, but that's the blessing, is that it's so much easier, I think, to access and amplify those voices now compared to, I think, 10 years ago, all you kind of had was an influencer, like, those big like YouTube names. So you kind of had to hope they were going to talk about something, or that was that. Now you've got these small accounts that can blow up on a really important video. So it's a bit easier, I think, sometimes to get the voices out there.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Okay. What are some foundations or groups you recommend people to support to aid First Nations?
I wrote like the most extensive list ever, but I just picked a few. I was like, just focus. So I started with, I was trying to pick some areas that I think that are really, I don't know, like important to me. Not that they're not all important, but, resonate with me, my work, my experiences. So I started with the Indigenous Literacy Foundation. So they work in rural and remote communities to increase literacy in First Nations kids, because there's a big gap in rural and remote between that. They do amazing work, really, really fantastic stuff. Then we've got, now this one is only in New South Wales, but I thought, that makes sense, since we've got, we're in that space. So they're called Black, but it's BLAK, is a peak org for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that are LGBTQIA+, as well as sister girl and brother boy, and, all that sort of stuff, safe space to find resources, all that sort of stuff. Another one in that space is Black Rainbow. This one is nationwide. So again, kind of all that sort of, positive health, positive relationships, well-being, safety for Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander, LGBTQIA+, and brother boy and sister girl folk. I think there's so much underrepresentation of brother boy and sister girl communities. So I think I really wanted to kind of bring those two to attention because they do such good work with those communities. So many other LGBTQA+ foundations in Australia do good work, amazing work, but they lack that little bit of cultural aspect that these two have for those specific things. And this one's not specifically First Nations, but they work with a lot of First Nations women, which is Sisters Inside, and they help women that are incarcerated. And why I'm passionate particularly about this one is because a lot of women that are incarcerated because they were defending themselves in a domestic and family violence situation, or they have had an AVO out on them, like how do I explain it? Like, the male has been the perpetrator, but he's just taken one out on the woman as like a retaliation. She's breached it and gone to prison, or they've been sex workers, that sort of thing, gone to prison for, things that are survival, essentially. So I'm really big on, in general, I work a lot in my actual professional work. Me and a colleague are kind of the people in our team that work with incarcerated students. So we're quite passionate about that incarcerated space because I've worked in like youth crime and stuff. So I don't believe in this like youth crime epidemic that, the media wants to have you believe in. I think people can be rehabilitated. I can believe you can reduce recidivism. And I think a lot of the problems that cause this are, again, structural and can be solved by people in power doing more instead of putting more money in their pockets. But that is a rant that I will not go down. But those ones are the ones I picked because I thought they hit a few different areas that are, very important.
Yeah, the Literacy Foundation is one that is my birthday present to myself. I will donate to there because I really love their work. I just think that that's really important. And then the foundation that I actually set up Euryale with, donated to, was my first foundation, was the Backtrack charity, which was all about getting youth that have been incarcerated, but getting them back on track, getting them back.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I really love the ones that you've picked because they're all kind of the ones that are close to home to me too.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I have such a passion for that space of like crime and stuff because, I think a lot of people, I've had a lot of conversation. I don't want to go down too far with this. So I'll try to keep it brief. A lot of people, go, oh, well, that's a really easy stance to have when you haven't been a victim. I'm like, babe, can I tell you? I've been very much many times. And that's actually why I'm such an advocate for it, because if we can try to stem the flow, then it won't continue to happen, and they won't pass this on to their children if they then have these healthy behaviors, because this is how this happens. I'm actually passionate about it because I am a victim. It's that's the whole point. I'm doing it to stop it, because locking them up, I'm sorry, but all the research tells us doesn't do anything.
I completely agree. The whole aspect of rehabilitation is 100% the way that needs to be pushed, and not the lock them up, throw away the key agenda, because it doesn't provide any support for anyone. It just perpetuates the needless suffering of the generations
Absolutely.
to follow.
Especially for what I would consider like little crimes. I'm like, some drug offenses? I'm like, really? I'm like, they're in the same prison as like the, you know, like someone that's like
Right?
murdered
Doesn't
someone.
make
Like,
any sense.
I'm like, damn. I'm like, that's serious. That's a. Not sure that's an even. Okay, whatever.
Even field, so to say.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
It's crazy, and that's why I say I feel like I'll derail everything conversation-wise if I get too far down. I'll be like, oh my god. I'll be like, this is actually an anti-prison podcast. If I get no, oh my god, people are gonna hear that little clip and be like, oh my god, they're so revolutionist. They're anarchists. Far out.
Oh my god. So is there anything before I ask you the last question that I didn't send through? That
surprise
is kind of
question.
Like one that is going to be our regular question for guests.
Oh, now you've told everyone because we'll be airing these beforehand.
It's not a regular question, actually. They just we paused and they told me it wasn't.
That was just the spirit before.
Yes, it was. It overtook again.
The rumors to dry out and the questions. But is there anything that you wanted to talk about beforehand?
Again, like if you let me, I'll derail. So probably not. I do just want to say thank you so much for having me along. This has been amazing. I've had so much fun. Again, thank you for being patient with the tech at the beginning. But no, this has been so much fun. I've actually really, really enjoyed it. Yeah, I wasn't sure what to expect. You know, I've never been on a podcast guest before. No, it's been really, really fun. I've loved it.
Amazing. We've well, I can't speak for you. For me, I have absolutely adored every minute of it. Or expanded my own knowledge of First Nations spirituality. Not obviously, it can't be said as a collective thing, but for like a brief whitened rundown of it, like it's so in depth and beautiful. Like
I just have more and more appreciation now, even as an ally, to just be like, nah, like not having it anymore. Let these people have their platforms. Like
just you out in the middle of Sydney.
Literally. I love it. I love it. So, no, I'm so glad I could share it.
Yeah, I appreciate it so much, and I'm sure we'll have you back on because I would love to delve into like the more serious side of things of like how from your professional standing, how like incarceration and things like that can affect the spirit type thing, making it that more spiritual aspect, I guess, bringing into it, if that makes sense. Did we freeze? Pause for a brief interlude.
Please hold while we reconnect your call.
Hi, so it's Euryale much later than this was filmed. But anyway, we ended up having huge technical difficulties. So the end of this video actually ended up only filming me and Wolf and not Kacie, unfortunately. But the last question was, if you were a deity, how would we summon you? And Kacie answered, in short, cheese and wine, but the quality of the cheese and wine was based on your tax bracket, which I really loved. Okay, see you, bye.
But yes, thank you again so much for hanging out with us, and we'll catch you on the next one.